Those of you who do not know it, every month our monthly letter covers a specific subject for study and practice. In other words, our students who receive these letters, instead of a correspondence course, have a freshly evolved letter containing specific points of study and practice so that they can make this work practical. And beginning with a new year, we are going to have a long series in this monthly letter on the subject of the contemplative way of life, showing the principles of the infinite way that can be adopted into our way of life so as to make our way more harmonious, more peaceful. So that for those interested in the subject of supply who are not receiving the letters, drop a line to Mr. Eastman and I'm sure there'll be some available. And for those of you who are not familiar with the work of our monthly letters, I hope you will make yourself familiar, because it is, outside of these trips, it is the only way I have of keeping in direct personal contact with our students and give them lessons every month that evolve out of our experience. You can understand that traveling, working with thousands of students, and maintaining an active healing practice that is never less than 75 cases every day of the week, but I must have experience, and that experience goes into those letters and is shared with our students, because we have no organization, and there never will be an infinite way organization. There never will be memberships. All that I have been instructed to do with the infinite way is to present in these different forms, the writings, the letter, the tape recordings, to present these principles to whoever may be interested in them, and then let them make as much use or as little use as they wish, because too many people, more especially in the metaphysical world, have gotten the impression that if they join one of the metaphysical movements, that this automatically will give them some amount of protection or healing, or that if they do some ushering work or committee work or something of this kind, they'll get God's grace and thereby benefit. And this is all a lot of nonsense. You can, if you like, give your whole life to church work and you'll be doing some good on the human plane. But don't believe for a moment that any of it is going to find extra grace or favor with God, or joining one of the movements or churches. The benefit that we derive from God is in direct proportion to our knowing the truth. And we can know that truth inside or outside of organizational work. And I prefer that those who are in organizations remain there. And if they wish to carry on their work, do so until such time as they feel they don't want any more organizational work. We do not dictate. We ask nothing of any student, except that if they are interested in learning about this message, that they at least give it a fair opportunity to work for them, and that they can only give by their devotion to the study and practice of the principles. All right, sir. Oh, we've been on the air all this time. Question: while our young people are in our care, what is the highest service we can give them from a spiritual point of view, besides giving them religious freedom? Well, this is an interesting question. And of course you will have to understand that my answer comes to you from my own experience, and therefore I have no way of claiming that it is the answer. It is only the answer as I have discovered it and as I have found it. And I suppose there wouldn't be any better way of illustrating this than to give my own experience in my own family. As many of you know, in fact many of you may have the pamphlet, Lesson to Sam. When Sam came to me, he was about 9 or 10 years of age. Probably less than that, younger than that. And now he's 17 this month. And my attitude toward him was this: I told him at the age of 12, the age of 12, I told him that we were going to have a relationship of man to man, that he was virtually old enough for that, because in the Hebrew teaching, when a boy reaches 13, he enters manhood and he's expected to accept some of the responsibilities of a mature youth. And therefore, if it's possible to them, it's possible to you. And so our relationship isn't going to be ever one of punishment or reward. It's just going to be man to man. I'll give you the benefit of my life, of my experience, and then you do with it what you will. And in proportion as you can accept what I give you, I'm sure you'll benefit because of these years of experience. And so it was that we began with this idea of daily meditation. And Sam learned to meditate so that he could meditate with us when we were at home, or he could meditate when he was off at school or about to play. And no one checked up on him, because he knew this, that by their fruits ye shall know them. By the results that he's getting out of life, he will know and we will know whether he's being obedient to meditation. And he was the one who could choose. Then, each day, if anything came up in his conduct or his education that warranted, he was given instruction. Never punishment, just instruction. And an opportunity even presented itself to do this, which I think is very important with children. He was then a member of the Boy Scouts, and one day in speaking to me, he said something that seemed kind of startling, and I said, "Is that true?" And he said, "On my scout oath." And I said, "Never do that again, and never say that again. Never do I want you to be on oath. If your word isn't good without an oath, I wouldn't take it on oath. So let's have it understood. I'll never lie to you. I never want you to lie to me. When I say anything to you, it won't be on oath. I expect you to take my word for it, and I'm going to take your word. There'll never be any question or doubt, unless you prove yourself wrong, but there'll never be a need for an oath. And let us get away from all this oath business, because a man who has to take an oath to be a good citizen isn't a good citizen to begin with. A man who has to take an oath to tell the truth isn't worthwhile listening to, because if his word isn't any good without it, I wouldn't trust it with it. And you know, Sam and I have had that relationship ever since. We don't question each other. We don't doubt each other. There's never been an occasion to doubt him on anything. Well, in the same way then, When a problem comes up of study, and of course you know that with all children there are problems of study. Some subjects are more difficult than others. I don't sit down and do homework with them. I probably can't, which is also good for him. But I say, all right, Sam, let us meditate. We meditate, and he goes to his homework, and he finds the answers are already in sight. As a matter of fact, this happened with a problem in mathematics, and he just couldn't find the answer or a way of solving it. He came to me, and we meditated. He went back to the book, and he said, why, the answer was plain as day right in front of me. Well, of course it would be. Wherever there's a 2 times 2, there's a 4. You just have to have vision to see it. And so it is that whatever the name or nature of a problem may be, the answer is in the problem. It couldn't be anywhere else. And so that is the way we work on his lessons, so that whether we're home or not, he knows now that if he's stuck with anything in schoolwork, to sit down and meditate, go back to his work, and the answer is there. In the same way with human relationships. He has just as many human relationship problems as we do, perhaps more, because children are apt to be a little bit more cruel than grown-ups, a little bit more harsh in their treatment of each other. And he has learned, too, to work out every problem of human relationships with meditation. And he finds that that works. Whenever there is a question that comes up, maybe on moral issues or political issues, we solve it first with a meditation and then a discussion. And so it is that while someone could come into our home and say, you are not giving this boy any religious training, I think I would take the opposite side of that and claim that I'm giving him the best religious training, because first of all, I'm teaching him to be utterly and completely dependent on God instead of on man. Completely dependent on his contact with God instead of trickery, lying, deceiving. Teaching him how to live truthfully in a world where truth isn't always in evidence. And so it is that when the question is asked me, what about Sunday school? I say to our students, most of whom are parents and grandparents, that is strictly your problem. I do not give advice. What was good for me may not be good for you. I am particularly grateful to my mother that she never sent me to Sunday school or church, because when I was ready for a spiritual experience, I had no limitations, no restrictions, no prejudices, no biases, and I was able to start a search for God. And the church couldn't have given me morals. Morals come to us in 2 ways. In some cases, they are born into us. We just come here with a certain amount of integrity. And the second way is through our home. If our parents, brothers and sisters, can't instill morality into us, I'm sure that a Sunday school teacher 1 hour a week can't do it. And you see, morality can never be taught. Integrity can't be taught. It has to be imparted through experience. In other words, if Sam, with the keen mind of youth, would see me live contrary to what I'm teaching, how long do you think it would take him to be aware of it and to distrust me and probably distrust everybody? If Sam didn't see his mother and me living perfectly harmoniously, truthfully, honorably, how long do you think it would take him to discover that? But if we can show him harmony in the home, no quarrels, no mudslinging, no unkindness to each other, if we can show him that, that's what he's absorbing in his flesh and in his bones and in his brain. If we live contrary to that, he knows it, and his life becomes one of suspicion. And unless he's very strong within, he could go to the right or to the left. In the same way, I am a strong believer in capitalism. I believe that it is the finest system, human system, yet devised for the carrying out of prosperity, justice, and equality. I don't mean that there haven't been wrongs in capitalism or abuses, because that would be nonsense. There is no such thing as a perfect system. But the system itself offers far more to the world than any other system devised up to this point. But if capitalism isn't lived with the idea of love thy neighbor as thyself, if we're going to use capitalism as a way to take advantage of somebody else, we're no better off than the communists, who take everything away from 200 million people and divide it up among the 200,000 who belong to the party. You must know that while Mr. Khrushchev could come to the United States and buy over $1 million worth of property to take back with him, finest automobiles and radios and televisions made, that none of the people of Russia could do that, nor could they ever receive the opportunity to earn enough to do that. And Mr. Khrushchev has never earned it. Be assured of that. He has never worked a day since his childhood days at anything except plunder. Now, if we who have this system that has built a great nation like England and the Commonwealth, the United States, Canada, South America, if we have a system like that that has been capable of this, and if we imbue that system with this idea of love thy neighbor as thyself, do you not see that we can bring to light a really great economic system based on a religious principle? Well, so it is with our children in the home. If capitalism in our home means that his mother and I have everything and he has nothing, it isn't a good form of capitalism, and it won't work unless a child is given his share of the family good, unless he is treated in a way that makes him know that he's a partner in the household. How can you expect him to take a part in the building up of a family, in the building up of family life, in the building up of home life? A child not only has feelings, but a child has intelligence and discernment, and they know whether we're being niggardly with them or whether we're being foolish. So it is. As long as a child is in my care, I'm going to make it my duty, my responsibility, to live up to the highest spiritual standpoint that I know. Now, it can't be perfect because I haven't attained that, but it's going to be the best that I know and the highest, And I'm going to treat the child as if it were a real member, a partner in the family, and show it an example of the highest of integrity of which I'm capable, consideration, and yet expect from the child the equal of what I'm giving. And the way I would bring it out, or the way I try to bring it out, is not through punishment, but by setting the example and bringing it to the attention of the child, and then trusting his innate integrity to do the rest. And of course my experience with him has been that there is that innate integrity there. And so it does come back. And I'm sure that most children have it. I personally disagree with every psychologist on the face of the globe in everything that they have to say about bringing up children. And if there were a way of reversing all that they teach, be assured I would like to do it. For this reason, it isn't true because children are born in the ghetto that it's natural for them to end up in prison. It isn't true because their environment may be one of lack or limitation that they have to be that way. Not at all. Every individual is expected to come into this world with some degree of integrity, and then that is supposed to be trained by the parents at home. And in the few cases where it isn't, even then the child should be able to rise above it, not succumb to it. And that doesn't mean that here and there we're not going to find some juvenile delinquency, but I would like to tell you this, that in my 30 years of moving in Christian Science, Unity, and New Thought families, do you know that I do not know of one single case of juvenile delinquency in any one of those many thousands of homes? And I know what the reason is. When a family thinks enough of their religious life to sit down for an hour every day to do a lesson, to read the Bible, go through their spiritual affirmations, when they think enough of their spiritual life to read 3 or 4 magazines every month on spiritual topics, like Unity magazine, Christian Science magazine, New Thought magazine, when they think enough, the parents, of their spiritual life, not only to go to church Sunday, but to go to lectures Monday and classes Tuesday and somewhere else on Thursday, do you not know that they are holding their family in a spiritual consciousness, and that if they taught their children nothing, openly, outwardly, their very life would be the teaching. The very atmosphere that is created by their Bible reading. Do you know how much Bible reading is done in the average Christian Science and Unity home? Do you know how much Bible study takes place in the average Christian Science and Unity home? I'm purposely not mentioning the infinite way because I'm sure you already know that our entire religious life is made up of the study of the Bible and mystical, spiritual writing. Now just think, with an atmosphere like that in the home, what you are giving to the children. I had occasion in speaking to a psychologist who acknowledged that after 22 years of active practice they had never seen a healing. I brought out to them the fact that among our metaphysician families, that school records show that our children average only 20% of the absences of the non families for sickness. That among these metaphysical families, there is hardly to be found a juvenile delinquent that in the homes of these metaphysical families there is not to be found an alcoholic. Of course there couldn't be, because alcohol is strictly not a part of the metaphysical home, certainly not the Christian Science or Unity home. And so you see that with an atmosphere like that in the home, you might really say the children are living in God. They're living in God consciousness. They're living in the consciousness of parents who are living for their religious life. The religious life isn't something separate and apart from their home, because in the metaphysical family, every business problem is solved with metaphysical treatment or spiritual treatment. Every health problem is solved with metaphysical or spiritual treatment. Every problem of human relationship is solved that way. So you may say then that in the metaphysical home there is a life of praying without ceasing. And this, you see, reflects itself in the children, because, as Emerson told us, what you are shrieks so loudly, I cannot hear what you say. And so it is that the child who may be in what is considered a Christian home, but finds his parents bickering with each other, his mother or his father subject to alcohol or language that's unfit for children, that child doesn't believe. Whereas the child in the home that is spiritually governed, that child knows that God is a reality. It isn't allowed to go off to school without a religious instruction in the morning, and so forth. And so my answer always is, whether or not you send your child to Sunday school, don't feel that you have done your duty by your child, because you haven't. You are only doing your duty by your child if you are living the Christian life in your home. And if you're only paying lip service to it, you're doing an injustice to your child. Now, will you explain why children too young to understand suffer such hurts and injuries? Certainly. Of course, I'll give you the same answer there. I just said to you that in the homes of our metaphysical families, children's absences from school for disease, for sickness, is only 20% of that of the non-metaphysical family. Why? Because the metaphysical family is taught the cause of disease, its prevention, and its cure. And if a student of metaphysics wants to know how to keep their home free of alcoholism, free of drugs, free of sin, free of disease, all they have to do is study the principles of their teaching and apply them, and it's done. Because this we know. We know what causes disease. We know how to prevent it. We know how to cure it if it happens. We are not yet 100% perfect. But I will tell you this, that we are 80%. We have eliminated 80 or more percent of the sins, of the diseases, of the lack and limitation from our metaphysical and spiritual homes because of our knowledge of these principles. Now, it isn't easy at the start of one's study to grasp the cause of disease, because it is so contrary to all that is known in the human world. But with persistence, with, let us say, a year of very diligent study and practice, it is possible for the mother or the father in any home to learn enough of these principles so as to keep their homes fairly free and I would say 80% free, of all the sins and all the diseases and all the accidents that the rest of the world is plagued with. I'd like to give you one illustration. During World War II, I took care of the children of my patients and students who were called to war. And these children served in action at every front. And we not only did not lose one child, we did not have one child wounded, injured. Now, it isn't because God cares any more for my children than yours or the other fellows. It isn't because God favors one religion over another. That's nonsense. In God, there is no such thing as personality. God is no respecter of persons. There is no one person meaning more to God than another. It hasn't anything to do with God. It has to do with ye shall know the truth. And when you know the truth, you can make bullets inoperative even at the front. The Bible is very clear on that none of these things shall come nigh thy dwelling place if, and there's where it comes in, if you know the truth, if you can abide in the truth. The Master makes it very clear that you will be a branch of a tree that is cut off and withereth unless you abide in this truth. And therefore, safety and security, health, prosperity, has nothing whatsoever to do with God. Except, of course, that God is the author of it, the creator, and the... But insofar as you and I receiving it has nothing to do with God. It has to do with you and I, you and me. We, by the truth that we know, determine what degree of harmony there is going to be in our lives. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free. And I only wish, and I do hope, that as a result of these great discoveries of the Dead Sea Scrolls, I do hope that someday the history will be written of the great spiritual fruitage. And I mean by that the health and the safety and security and prosperity that came to the followers of the Master for 300 years after his resurrection, merely by obedience to the teachings that he left with this world. Because if such a book is ever published, you will know the answer to this question, and the answer to why there are wars, why there is injustice among men, can be answered in one way. It is your ignorance of spiritual principles. As long as it was permitted for those spiritual principles to be taught, the people showed forth the benefit of it. And in this past 90 years, since these principles are again being taught, it is again possible to reinstate harmonious, successful, joyous lives, and without depriving anyone, without unfairly competing, without lying advertising, without the selling of false products. Everyone can prosper who adopts the principles, the spiritual principles of life, into their mind and body and business, or art or profession. There is no place for failure, and failure cannot take place because the principles are absolute. Yes, if I were to hook up this electricity, I can assure you there'd be failure, but the failure wouldn't be because of the principle, it would be because of my ignorance of that principle. I just do not know the principles of electricity. Anybody can fail with anything if they do not know the principles. And so it is with the religious life. There are certain spiritual principles which have been revealed several times on earth, but which each time disappear from the earth within a couple of generations after the original revelator. Now, as a matter of fact, these principles lived on earth for 300 years after the crucifixion, and that's the longest period so far known for principles to survive the revelator. As a rule, they disappear in either the second or third generation after the revelator. And of course, you know the answer why, I'm sure. You've heard this story that two people were walking along the street and discussing these spiritual principles of life and how successful they were and how harmonious their lives and what wonders these principles were doing. Well, it seems that right behind them the devil was walking, and with him one of his disciples. And this disciple said to the devil, "This is awful. What's ever going to happen to us?" Oh, the devil says, "Don't worry about that. I'll get him to organize it." And of course, you see, when the organization takes place, the spiritual principles go out the window. And let me show you a reason why. We have no organization. And when this work started, it started without capital, without financing. And I was the author of one book, and completely unknown, and no way of getting it published because no publisher knew me. And the material was too radical. That book was The Infinite Way. And I had to start from the basis of just one man with one book, and I adopted the principles of no advertising, no proselyting, just sitting at home and waiting for a pathway to be beaten to my door. And in 14 years, 26 books are being published in the United States, in England, some in Holland, some in Germany, a couple now in translation in French, one in Japanese, and 400,000 miles have been financed in 8 years around the world, and 200,000 of those miles have been financed for two of us. And all of the activity of the Infinite Way has been abundantly financed, with all bills paid on the first of the month, and without asking for money, soliciting money, raising money of any kind in any way, no appeals. All right? As our students developed, and a call went up to organize, I brought this point to them. Organization would ruin you, because unconsciously or subconsciously you would start depending on that organization. And I don't want your success that way. You either make it on your understanding of these principles or fail and get out. I only want those to carry on this work who can demonstrate by their attained state of consciousness that they can finance themselves, whether it's around the world or whatever the activity may be. Don't come to me. I have no headquarters. I have no funds for you. Each individual must demonstrate on their own state of consciousness And you know that's what we've been doing ever since. Every single person who has tried to do infinite way work and didn't have the consciousness for it has dropped by the wayside. All of those who had the consciousness, who could wait until they attained the consciousness, are having tremendous success. And they can all say to you, as I say to you, our entire dependence is on inner unfoldment for whatever the need may be, large or small. In these only 14 years that have gone by, some of the greatest publishing houses in the world have come to us and asked for the privilege of publishing infinite way books. Harper's in the United States, probably the #1 publishing house of America. George Allen and Unwin in London, certainly the #1 publishing house of England. And so in Holland, and so in Germany. So you see then that as long as we keep it unorganized, we will have success, because the success will come forth from the consciousness of those who have attained it, and nobody will be supporting them artificially. Nobody will be sending out a check from headquarters to tide them over. They will either demonstrate that these spiritual principles of God are absolute, that you can go without money and without person, without scrip, and still be fed and clothed and housed and transported. It must be proven by every individual, whether they're in this work or whether they're running a corner grocery store, that it is the principle of God that prospers it, and not human cunning or any other human device. Because that is what our teaching is meant to do. It is not meant to set up a means of supporting people. It is so very easy in these days of high taxes to receive great big endowments from people who would just like to give some of their surplus money. But what does it do to a corporation, to a movement that has this big money and hands it out to those who haven't developed the consciousness to produce it for themselves? And if they have that consciousness, they don't need it. So it has been. Very often we hear, oh, you should be on radio and television. And others say, oh, I suppose you can't afford it. We have been offered as high as $5,000 a week to go on radio and television. And 2 years ago we were offered an outright gift of $10 million. And that's £5 million to go on radio and television, and refused it. Why? We don't need money. You don't go on radio and television with money. Anybody can do that in an organized way. Anybody can do that in a human way. You go on spiritually, and we can go on any day we want, radio and television, because there's not a thing in the world to prevent our going on. No powers to keep us, no powers antagonistic to truth. So it is. Whatever the need may be, there is a spiritual law to produce it. Whatever the need may be, there is a spiritual understanding that will give it to us. It can be health problem, mental or physical or moral. It can be a financial problem. It can be business, human relationships. There are spiritual principles, and when we have them, they permeate consciousness, mind, body, home, so that anyone who even comes into the home feels the atmosphere of it. They feel the peace, the same as if you went into a church that was headed by a minister or priest or rabbi of spiritual integrity. You would feel the spirituality, you'd feel the atmosphere of love as you entered that edifice. It's exactly the same in the home, because the place whereon thou standest is holy ground if you make it so. Now, in your monthly letter of 2 months ago, you mentioned that there was no longer need to fear war. With all the reports of impending war, would you kindly enlarge on this a little? Yes, I would in two ways. From the very human standpoint, there can't be a war because there couldn't be a winner. The only way there could be a winner, really, in war, temporarily I mean, would be if the Western powers decided to unloose their bombs on Russia without any advance notice. It would wipe the only worldwide evil that still exists right off the earth. And then the rest of the world could get together again with the United Nations and build a momentary peace. But there would be no other way of any war being successful because, or I should say, as you know, that never will be done. The Western world isn't made up of that kind of a nature. So that the only possibility of war is really for Russia to start it. And Russia knows better than we do, better than our people do, I mean. Our governments know it, but our people don't know it, neither your people nor the American people know it, that Russia is so completely rimmed and surrounded with atomic bombs that at the first move she would make to throw one, she'd be inundated with them. Russia knows this. She knows the location of practically every bomb site there is. She knows how many submarines we have out in the sea carrying those missiles. And so it is that Russia knows only too well that war is an impossibility. And so, just from that human standpoint, war is practically an impossibility unless it could come through an accident. But when I said there is no fear of war, it was not for that reason. It is for this reason. Steinmetz, before he passed on, was asked, what will be the great discovery of the 20th century? And his answer was, the great discovery of the 20th century will be the nature of spiritual power. Now that may seem like a strange answer to you because you probably have thought that the world knew all about spiritual power, that with all the churches there are on the face of the earth, that they must certainly know all about spiritual power. But as a matter of fact, there have only been a few times in the last 1700 years when the truth about spiritual power has been known, and then only to a very few people. The knowledge of spiritual power came into the world with a few mystics in India, in China, in the Holy Land. And finally, with the greatest demonstration of it so far known, through the ministry of Jesus Christ. 300 years after the crucifixion, the secret of spiritual power was removed from the world, hidden from the world, and the only times since then that it has come to light is again in the experience of some few mystics. And each time that it came to light, it was lost. So that you might say that for world purposes, there has been no practice of spiritual principles in the world since 300 A.D. on any scale wider than a small individual human scale. And so it was that he could safely predict, or rather base his prediction on the fact that the secret of spiritual power was at the time of his death unknown. And that was earlier in this century. And His vision showed him that it would be discovered in this century, and it has been. We know now, beyond all question of doubt, the nature of spiritual power and the mode and means of bringing it into expression in this world. Unfortunately, it isn't something that can be intellectually imparted, because it isn't an intellectual subject. It has to be imparted from one of illumination to another who is ready for illumination. And so it is that a very slow process is taking place in imparting the secret of spiritual power, and while imparting the secret of spiritual power, practicing it to such an extent that some of the great evils of the world are being met. I could give you this as an example, that in our work we have been given the opportunity of coming into capital and labor cases, corporation and union cases, where there is no human solution to be found. And in every case, spiritual power produced the solution and produced a continuing harmonious relationship. I could point out many other ways in which our students are working. We have a group of students situated around the world, small group of students, probably 250 in number, who have been and are being taught the nature and operation of spiritual principles, and these are being applied to world problems as they arise. And as of this moment, I can tell you that while we are far from being pleased with results, we have had sufficient results to know that our work is bearing fruitage, and that spiritual power has been discovered, and this is the age in which it will be made manifest. I make so free as to tell you that we are within just a very few years of witnessing the ushering in of the first stage of spiritual living, which is love thy neighbor as thyself. That is not yet the fully spiritual life, but it is the first approach to it. In other words, the 10 Commandments, at least 9 of the 10, are not spiritual. It's just a code of human conduct. But it would be very difficult for a person to develop a spiritual consciousness who is in violation of those 10 Commandments. And so this idea of love thy neighbor as thyself isn't entirely spiritual. It's a very, very good human code of conduct, which if we all would accept, would prepare our consciousness for the inflow of the Spirit, because be assured of this: no one is going to attain any great degree of spiritual light whose consciousness hasn't been prepared by a life, or some part of their life, of loving their neighbor as themselves. In other words, it would be very hard for a person to develop spiritual consciousness while they are indulging bigotries, biases, hatreds, resentments, fears. And so it is that the first step toward receiving a spiritual inflow would be to make every attempt in our lives to live by the code of do unto others as ye would have them do unto you, love thy neighbor as thyself, and all of these other lessons that are taught in our metaphysical and spiritual teachings. Then, with at least a purified human consciousness, we would be ready for the inflow of the Spirit. And so we're going to witness in the lifetime of most of the people sitting in this room, we're going to witness the age of love thy neighbor as thyself. We are going to witness countries take responsibility for other countries. Not take dominion over them or domination of them, but take the responsibility for seeing that each country is able to stand on its own feet and have help while it is getting there. We are going to witness a union of governments, not by decrees. It's going to be on a higher plane than that. It is going to be exactly as we have it in our work, a union in the spirit. In our infinite way, we have no ties with our students, no bond, no human relationship. There's no membership, there's no obligation, no debts on either side, and whatever is holding us together is nothing but a spiritual bond of love. I frankly tell the students, I owe you nothing, you owe me nothing. Whatever I'm doing in life, I'm not doing for you. I'm doing as the fulfillment of my own state of consciousness, and I couldn't do otherwise regardless of what you might do. And so, I want nothing of you except whatever comes as love. Free will. Spontaneous outburst of gratefulness, joyousness, sharing, whatever it is. But there's no debt, no obligation. And you see, we go on year in and year out, year in and year out, with the most harmonious relationship amongst all of us. Not only between me and the students, but if you could only see the joy in our students as they travel the world or travel a country and meet with each other. They have no bond, remember, of membership. They merely have this inner spiritual bond, and this is what is taking place in the world today. This it is that enables nations to say, we will get together and discuss business, not just compete with each other and rule each other out of existence, not compete with each other so that one country gets to be a dominating economic giant and all the other countries fall beneath the weight, but rather we will discuss business, we will meet with business, we will have and it is not the written obligations that will bind them, because, as I've brought out with Sam, a contract between any two governments is a scrap of paper and it is worthless. There has never been a country honor a piece of paper 5 minutes after it wasn't profitable. Scraps of paper are no good. If their word isn't any good, their paper isn't any good. And you can see that right now in the United Nations, where Russia has agreed to pay certain payments each year, and because it isn't getting its way, it won't pay them. It has agreed not to do certain things, and it is doing them. Why these promises are pie crusts, unless there is a spiritual integrity behind them. The paper of its own self is worthless.